I was hanging with a Latina colleague last week, a fellow sociologist, a good friend. We were hashing out the concepts of implicit bias and privilege, because that's what sociologists do over a tea and an almond croissant. She shared a story with me of a course she team taught at a highly ranked university. As they went through module after module, she became increasingly frustrated as her white male colleagues contributed only the works of other white males. What's more, when she approached one of these colleagues and shared her thoughts on this, she was met with a blank face. Even now, years later, she still describes him as a nice guy and a good colleague, yet he couldn't even comprehend what she was saying. It wasn't even on his radar. As I began to challenge her characterization of him as a good colleague in spite of this, I was suddenly taken aback. I was all ready to list all of the things wrong with this antiquated thinking and the exclusionary nature of the ivory tower as a tool of oppression, when it occurred to me that I had done the exact same thing. In the first episode of The Signal, I presented concepts from Frantz Fanon, George Herbert Mead, Charles Horton Cooley, Karl Marx, W.E.B. Du Bois, even Aristotle, but not a single woman. I could have brought in bell hooks, Alexandra Kollontai, Barbara Risman, Simone de Beauvoir, Cheryl Harris, Dorothy Roberts, Cristina Lacomba, Yoo Jin Kang, Angela Gonzales. I could have named so many people, but I chose to reference all men. They weren't even all men of color. I share this to say that implicit bias is there for us all. It's not a matter of the kind of person you are or even the type of work that you do. It's about how we have all been socialized. So today, I want to take a step back and really work to define the language that we use and the social construction of inequalities. That's where this podcast begins. Welcome to the Architecture of Meaning. I'm really glad you're here. The Signal podcast is brought to you by the Architecture of Meaning. It is written and hosted by Nicole Rousseau, PhD. This podcast explores the stories beneath the stories, examining how narratives shape power and how power shapes our world. Thank you for joining me. This podcast occasionally draws upon lived experience, professional practice, and qualitative observation. I occasionally share stories from my experiences as an educator, researcher, foster and adoptive parent, and advocate. Unless otherwise indicated, the personal stories shared in this podcast are based on real events. These accounts are true to the best of my knowledge and recollection. When necessary, names and identifying characteristics have been altered to preserve confidentiality while maintaining the integrity of the events described. The events themselves are presented truthfully and without embellishment. I'd like to thank all the people who subscribed. I'd like to thank all the people who are in support of this kind of work. And I appreciate you being here right now. I'm Dr. Nicole Rousseau, a historical sociologist, scholar activist, college professor, the creator of theoretical frameworks, historical womanist theory, and social rhetoric, and I'm the founder of AOM. Before we can really have a conversation about any of this stuff, we're going to have a common understanding of the language. That's pretty much understood, right? I'm going to share with you what I share with my students at the beginning of every semester. There's language that I use again and again and again, and I want to make sure that it's understood so that we can have a real conversation around it. Think about the way that we talk. Think about the language that we use. Think about the terminology we have for things that matter to us as a society. Think of all the ways that we can say that you've fallen in love. Think of all the words that we have for sex. Think of all the words we have for money. Think about the things that matter to us. Remember, we create words so that we can communicate about things that matter to us as a society. And the words that we choose and how we choose to use them indicate how we as a society feel about them. Do you know what the word emasculation means? To emasculate. To strip someone of their masculinity, to strip away someone's power, virility, and strength, to physically, literally remove the phallus is what emasculation means. Now, tell me the equivalent for a woman. What does it mean to strip her of her virility, her power, her strength? What does it mean to strip her of everything that makes her a woman? We don't have language for that. Not that it's not occurring within our society. Not that we're not humiliated and degraded and assaulted and abused. Not that we don't need language for it. We choose not to have it because language matters. And when you put a name onto something, it has more meaning. And we're able to talk about it, which is the first stage in moving towards changing it. So let's define some key language that you will hear me throw around quite a bit. Marginalized people, processes of marginalization, and tools of oppression. What does the word minority mean? When I ask my students, the quickest answer is almost always a numerical distinction. Then I ask, who is the minority if a white person is in a room with 500 Black people? The replies are almost always, well, the Black people are still the minorities. Then I ask them why. That's when the answers stop coming so quickly. Why in a world with an overwhelming majority of non-white people are people of color considered a minority? Because it is a label, not a description. Being labeled as a minority is part of a larger structured system of oppression that works in concert with other processes of marginalization to maintain the hierarchy. The implication of the term minority is that it is a stagnant state of being, rather than an ever-evolving temporal position. Think about it. What do we call people who commit crimes, or people who are incarcerated, or people who are enslaved, criminals, prisoners, slaves? This diminishes their status as actual people and makes their position in the hierarchy their identity. But these are not circumstances that are unchanging, static identities. These are circumstances that can and do change. But if we are to maintain the hierarchy that is in place, we must maintain it through active, ongoing processes that facilitate, encourage, and support this marginalization. That is what is actually happening. We're not minorities. We're being oppressed and abused by a purposeful system designed to keep us disenfranchised, fragmented, and controlled. Fashioning our words against us is one of the many tools of oppression that maintain the status quo. These tools range from daily microaggressions to institutional inequalities to structural injustice. I will not participate in my own oppression by buying into the myth that I am minor, nor will I take on the responsibility for that oppression. I will call it out at every turn. I am not a minority. There are myriad processes at play that actively marginalize me, but that does not make me a minority. It makes me Black in America. So now that we have some common language, let's define a couple of concepts I often reference: implicit bias and internalized oppression. As I mentioned earlier, none of us is immune to implicit bias, not me and not you. We must understand that implicit bias isn't about who we are. It is about who we are trained to be. It has been carefully cultivated. We are purposefully taught misinformation that convinces us that some populations are superior to others. Margaret Rossiter coined the term the Matilda effect for women in the sciences whose scientific contributions were credited to men in their fields. Not only are their ideas taken, the men rewarded and publicly lauded, but oftentimes the women are discredited and personally maligned as having delusions of grandeur. A recent article published in the well-established journal Gender and Society introduced an even more nuanced discussion about who gets credit and whose knowledge is reproduced. The research team, Ethel Mickey, Joya Misra, Laurel Smith-Doer, and Ember Sky Kane Lee, term it the Maya effect. That said, we know this phenomenon is not exclusive to the sciences or academia or any given field. It is a part of the world that we live in. Whether we are talked over, dismissed, ignored, or shut down for things we watch others praised for, it impacts marginalized peoples in every aspect of our lives. The historical whitewashing of history and stealing of credit is what leads to generations of us believing that all the great things we have done, created, discovered, and established as a society have consistently been done by those in power, thus reifying their position of power. Quick, who discovered DNA? Who wrote The Great Gatsby? Who discovered the theory of relativity? Who invented the cotton gin? Who organized the March on Washington? It's not who you think. Marginalized peoples are responsible for inventing so many things in our world: the traffic light, automatic elevator doors, the gas mask, home security systems, the birth control pill, Kevlar, the COVID vaccine, and the clothes wringer, to name but a few. Yet we are represented as dependent, childlike, needy populations that take more than we give to society. This is not accidental. It is methodical, systematic. Being trained in this way, of course, we're all walking around with these notions of inferiority banging around in our heads. How could we not? And we don't have to be on the outside of a group to judge said group. We will turn that same eye onto ourselves as marginalized peoples, as we might on any other population. Internalized oppression is a sneaky and insidious result of the socialization processes that we all encounter. We talked about internalized oppression a bit in last week's episode, but I encourage you to think more deeply about it. Have you ever slut-shamed another girl? Even in your head, judging her because her skirt is short or because you saw her making out with some guy you liked. Have you ever thought you wanted a male lawyer because you need somebody really sharp? Have you ever been embarrassed by your grandmother's thick accent? Have you ever undergone painful chemical hair treatments to make your hair straight? Or worse, set a metal comb on fire and run it through your hair, all so you could look like the other girls? We've all had these moments because that is what we have been systematically taught to believe, even about ourselves. Bell Hooks was a philosopher who wrote extensively on the oppositional gaze and the active processes of marginalization that Black women encounter. Discussing marginalization, tools of oppression, implicit bias, and internalized oppression here on The Signal brings her to mind. March 17, 2008, Bell Hooks came to visit my university where I worked as Associate Director of Black Studies and as faculty in Sociology, Black Studies, and Women's Studies. As the Associate Director of Black Studies, I had the honor of being her liaison during her visit. This is the person that wrote the book that changed my life. I read Ain't I a Woman freshman year in college, and my mind was blown. I finally saw that it wasn't just me. I was 17 years old, impressionable, deeply traumatized by oppression, finding my way. This book set me on a path that would change my life forever, and during her visit to GMU, I told her as much. Her initial response was something along the lines of, "Really? I always hated that book. It was my first one." 20 years later, I can crack up at her response as with age, I now fully get it. But back then, I was a fresh PhD and I was devastated. It was so important to me that she understand why that work mattered so much. I sat literally at her knee for hours talking to her about how it changed my life, as well as my life's trajectory. And she stroked my hair and took it all in. When she signed my copy of her book later that evening, she would sign it, "This book was written for you." And when she went on stage that night for her speaking engagement, she would talk of her experience with me and how much it mattered to her. She would announce to the university that I had been hired at Kent State and would be leaving George Mason University that summer. She told them that they missed out on me and that it was their loss. For the second time, Bell Hooks changed my life and made me feel seen. Over a decade later, she died on my 48th birthday. She informed my work on levels that I am incapable of expressing. That encounter with her reminds me every day why I do what I do. For that person out there trying so hard to make sense of their world, for those of us who are sick and tired of being sick and tired. Yes, that is my second Fannie Lou Hamer reference in as many episodes. Bell Hooks gave me insight, understanding, knowledge, strength, and perhaps most importantly, she gave me permission to talk about it and the language to do it with. To continue this conversation, watch for this week's issue of our digital magazine, Field Notes, and a long-form essay in our Notes from the Margins digital column, both of which are accessible on Substack. And if you would like to continue receiving access to our platform, please consider subscribing. Next week, we're going to explore the role of isms within our society, why capitalism necessitates inequalities, and begin exploring fascism. Until then, keep asking yourself the hard questions and keep looking beneath the surface, because there's always another story, and beneath that story, there is another signal. This is The Architecture of Meaning. The Signal is written, hosted, and produced by Dr. Nicole Rousseau. Podcast artwork by Architecture of Meaning.